Brawl Stars recently turned 7 years old, and in that time it has gone through tons of massive changes and the game has just evolved a ton, and today we'll be going over the complete history of the game all the way from beta to now, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this video. Brawl Stars would have its first open beta on June 15th in 2017, and this was available to only iOS users that were located in Canada. Initially, there would be only 15 brawlers in the game, and the game was played in portrait mode. There were only 4 rarities, which were common, rare, epic, and legendary, and then you also did have the starter rarity for Shelly, but that doesn't really count. And as for the brawlers, the main part to highlight for now is that Rico actually used to be called Ricochet, and the standard Moira skin used to have a top hat. And in the beginning, there were really like 3 main game modes in the game. The first one was Solo Showdown, which is the one that has changed the least. The second one was Smash and Grab, which will later be renamed to Gem Grab. And the third one was Heist, and this will receive a major rework later on, but for now, those were the 3 biggest game modes. The upgrade system at this time mainly revolved around chips and elixir, which are 2 currencies that obviously don't exist anymore. The elixir was used to individually upgrade the health, attack, and super stats for the brawlers, and the chips were a way to directly unlock brawlers, with the only other way being through the brawl boxes, which also looked more like safes rather than the boxes we know today. So that's a really brief overview of how the game was like upon release. So let's fast forward 5 days, which is when it will get its first ever balance changes. Now, these weren't really too interesting. I mean, they just balanced out a few brawlers and fixed some map issues and made it so that bands couldn't have more than 50 members, and bands were the original names for the clubs. But in July, the game will receive its first ever update, which is obviously a massive deal. This update would introduce the first new brawler, which was Piper, and at the time, her range was so long that it literally didn't fit on your screen even at portrait mode, which was pretty crazy. This would also introduce the first new skin, which would be for El Primo, and that would be about it for all the super major changes. Outside of that, there were really just a ton of balance changes, as well as small things like sound effects getting added to the game. But now let's fast forward to September, which is where the game will receive its next major update, and this one will be absolutely massive. First of all, it introduced Pam and Tara into the game, but more importantly, it introduced the Brawl Ball game mode, which as we all know is probably the most iconic and famous game mode inside of Brawl Stars, and this will be massive for helping the game grow and become more well known. But on top of this, we would also get the additions of the super rare and mythic brawler rarities, which means that this update will complete all the rarities in the game. And there would also be the addition of the brawler boxes, which are basically ones that guaranteed brawlers, and the big box would also be added, and there was obviously a ton more stuff, but that was really about it for the major things. The next and final big update for 2017 will be in December, and this was a great update and a great way to end off the year. This would introduce Daryl, but more importantly, it really changed a lot of the fundamentals of the game. First of all, the stats for all the brawlers will be multiplied by 4, and even though that obviously didn't actually change the gameplay, it was still really important as it would allow for the numbers to be taken in more easily, and also would allow for them to be tweaked more while still keeping them at nice numbers. And along with this, the progression system in the game would also be changed, and this will get rid of the elixir and chips. The elixir will be replaced by tokens, and honestly, this whole system will be a bit complicated, so I'll try to simplify it. Basically, you would have pins, badges, and medals, and these would act as standard upgrades for the stats, and you could upgrade each stat 6 times and would have to go in order unless you got something out of a brawl box. But then you also have the crests, which were a new thing, and these would further buff some of these stats, and you could think of them as early versions of gears. But then finally at the very top you would have the star powers, which were brand new to the game along with the crests, but these were different as they will give unique abilities. And this stuff would all take tokens, which was the currency that replaced Elixir. And as for unlocking brawlers, well, the chests were removed. Now the main way to get the brawlers will be through the brawl boxes. So overall, the progression had really been completely changed with this update, and it was way different than before and also different from how it is now. But anyways, there is still a bunch of other stuff in this update. Like, you would have the introduction of friendly battles as well as tickets and the 2 PvE game modes, which were Robo Rumble and Boss Fight. And I'm sure you are all familiar with that, so I'm not going to bother wasting time going over it. But basically, this was the absolute biggest update the game had received up to this point, and things are looking pretty promising for the game, and it will be time for it to expand. And if you want this channel to expand, then go and drop a sub so I can continue making more higher quality videos like this one. But anyways, on January 19th of 2018, the game would now be available in 9 more countries, though this was still only available for iOS users. But after that, the next major update wouldn't come all the way until March, and I mean, this was a pretty big and game-changing update. This is the one that turned the game into landscape mode, and it would also change the progression system again because the last one was definitely a little too complex. Now, the progression system would really be based around keys, coins, and power points. The keys will be something new that replaced the old coins in the game, and their purpose was just to open brawl boxes, and 100 keys will let you open 1 brawl box. And the way you got these keys was pretty straightforward, as you got certain amounts for different game modes. And the new coins and power points would work pretty closely with each other. You would need to get enough power points to upgrade your brawlers, and the coins will be used to do the actual upgrade once you had enough power points, and this is kind of similar to how it is today. So this would really be like the start of modern Brawl Stars, as the game was finally in landscape mode and the upgrade system was something a lot more similar to how it is today. And just 2 months later in May, the game would receive another pretty big update, and this introduced Penny and Frank, but also completely reworked Heist so that it will be even on both sides, and also introduced a duo showdown mode. And there would also be a little adjustment to progression with the trophies and trophy leagues, as now there were 7 brawlers that were unlockable by hitting certain trophy milestones, and you couldn't get them out of brawl boxes. Plus, certain game modes were also now locked beyond trophy counts, with you having to hit a certain amount of trophies to unlock them. And at this point in time, the game was really starting to get popular and a lot more well known, which is why it was constantly getting big updates, with the next one being just 2 months later in June, and this was big for one very important reason. This was the fact that the game was now finally available on Android, and this would really open up the biggest market for the game, as right now Android is bigger than iOS for Brawl Stars, and that means that this update literally opened up over half of the player base. Plus, the game was also popular enough that people from other countries were using VPNs to connect to a country in which the game was available, and hype overall was just building up. So after getting 3 updates in just 4 months, there will be a 3-month gap in between the next update, which was in September. This is the update that would remove the top hat from Morris's default skin and also introduce Supercell ID for Brawl Stars. And on top of this, 4 event modifiers would also be introduced, which were a nice addition to the game and definitely helped make it feel more interesting and unique. And after this, we will get the December 2018 update just a week before the game global launched. This would introduce Leon, who was the newest legendary brawler, and he was also extremely strong at the time because his invisibility was really strong. But other than that, there would be some other changes, such as the game being upgraded to 3D, where it looked a lot better, and the bands would also get renamed to clubs, which is how we all know them as today. And a week after this update, you would have the global release of Brawl Stars, which is obviously such a massive deal, and it was like the best end to 2018, as the new year would have a lot in stock for the game. As for the actual day of global launch, I mean, there weren't really any changes, and instead it was just a large influx of players that would start playing the game, and this would really just lead to a ton of updates for the year of 2019, with the first one coming at the end of January. This introduced Jean, who would obviously be the first brawler added to the game after a global release, and outside of that, there were a couple of remodels for various brawlers, as well as a bunch more new skins. And outside of that, there really wasn't much apart from some changes to a couple of the different game modes as well as brawler balances. So this obviously wasn't like a massive update, but it was important as it added a new brawler. And then in February, Carl will be added along with Siege, which was a new game mode, and then there will be a gap with no updates in March. However, after this, everything will just really start to pick up. You would have 2 updates in April and May, which would mainly just add Rosa and Bibi into the game, but the actual massive update will be in June, and this was the Summer of Robots update, which was just amazing. Apart from adding one of the most hated and annoying brawlers, this update would add the second star powers, which was a massive deal because now brawlers would be more unique and it will give players more choice and would really help for the brawlers that didn't have a good star power before, as the second one could be a lot better. And the star points were also added, and obviously the star shop would come with that. And this was nice as you could get cool skins, and it gave more of an incentive for ranking up different brawlers, as that was one of the main ways how you got these star points. Plus, this time period overall was just great as everyone was mostly out of school, and that gave more time to play Brawl Stars, and the community was really just thriving here. And this is also the year in which we will get Esports, which was obviously really cool. There will be no update in July, but between August and October, there were 3 updates, and these introduced new brawlers along with new game modes like Lone Star, Takedown, and Power Play. And Power Play was like the first iteration of a competitive mode inside of Brawl Stars, and it was how regular players could like play competitive without going out to tournaments or like having to join a pro team, which helped for the people that like to play competitive but just didn't want to go all the way to the top level. So this was a good period, and overall the summer of 2019 was just amazing, and it is definitely top 3 for the best summers in the game. But anyways, to finish off 2019, there was the first Brawl Stars Championship as well as 2 new brawlers, plus there was a Present Plunder game mode, and overall this update wasn't anything super crazy, but it was a nice way to ease off the year, which had been really hectic earlier on. And this brings us to 2020, which was a really interesting time as lockdown was really starting to happen and more people had more time, which will lead to people playing Brawl Stars more often. However, this would also impact the development of the game as the devs couldn't really go to the office to work. However, despite that, this year was still off to a great start as I assume the devs had prepared a lot of stuff before. In January, you would have the introduction of a new permanent game mode, which was Hot Zone, and that was like the major part of that update. And then in March, there will be a much bigger update that added a bunch more stuff. This update would introduce the gadgets into the game, which obviously are now a massive part of the game. And this update would also really be like the first big collaboration that Brawl Stars would do, as they teamed up with PSG for a challenge, which could let you unlock the PSG Shelly skin early. And this would be a big step forward for the game as it opened the door for many more collaborations to come in the future. And then in May, there will be an even bigger update, and this one was truly game changing. It was this update that introduced the Brawl Pass and that whole progression system, and back then, the Brawl Pass had way less rewards than it currently has, so it's nice to see how it evolved since then. Plus, back then, you could buy the pass with gems, but now it is only able to be purchased with money, which has been controversial, but that would obviously come later on. With the Brawl Pass, you also had the introduction of the quests, which added more fun things to work towards in the game, though there definitely were some quests that just weren't that fun. But the other major part of this update was the removal of tickets and how the ticketed events were now completely free. And on top of this, the chromatic rarity had also been introduced along with the first chromatic brawler, which was Gale. And the thing with the chromatic brawlers was that they were available in the Brawl Pass, though you could also get them through the boxes like all the other brawlers. And even on top of all of that, this update also introduced the pins, which as we know today are extremely iconic, and there was even an event recently around a thumbs up and thumbs down pin, as those have really been the most iconic ones. But moving on, in June, Brawl Stars would expand over to China, which was obviously a big move as there is a massive audience over there. However, the Chinese version of Brawl Stars would be quite different than the normal Brawl Stars, and the biggest changes really came with the skins, and some of the Chinese skins are honestly just really cool, and I wish we could have some of them in the normal game. But anyways, a month later we will get the Summer of Monsters update, and this was obviously really massive and just really good, with the exception of the Super City Rampage mode, which was probably the worst part of the update, but other than that, everything else was great. I mean, this update would introduce the second star powers, which was big, and it would also allow for the pins to actually be used inside the game itself, as before you could only really use them in chat. But next up, we have one of my favorite things to happen in the game, which was in September. There was an update, but honestly there wasn't exactly anything too major that's worth covering right now. Instead, the main thing that happened in September was the release of the Star Park investor video, and this is really where the actual lore of the game will kind of start rolling out, and this was just really interesting, and I did make a whole video talking about the lore of the game if you do want to check it out later. But anyways, September would be the start of the lore rollout, which was a really exciting time in the game, and this will continue for the rest of the year. And in December, we had one of the most infamous additions to the game, and that was Edgar, who was the first free brawler in the game, and he was really good, and this is what would cause the Edgar apocalypse, which was honestly just crazy since literally everyone was using him. And it's crazy how he has evolved into one of the most hated brawlers in the game. But that would wrap up 2020, and that brings us to 2021. And in the beginning, there definitely seemed to be a focus on the competitive scene, as the championship for 2020 had brought in over 250,000 live concurrent viewers, which was a massive step up from 2019. In January, there will be the addition of the monthly qualifiers inside the game, which made it more accessible to different people. And then in March, Power League would be added, and that would replace Power Play, which we talked about earlier. Plus, there was another PSG collaboration in which there was now a PSG Dynamite skin up for grabs. In April, there wasn't exactly too much except for the addition of Knockout, which was a pretty fun mode, and now it is something that is permanently in the game, which is pretty cool. And honestly, the next few months of the game were great, as there were regularly new brawlers being added along with some other stuff. But the next notable things will be in November, and there were quite a lot of them. First up, let's start with the negative, which was the introduction of the gears. And I say it's a negative because the original gears just had a horrible system behind them, and that kind of ruined them for a lot of people. And it wouldn't be until almost a year later that it will finally get reworked. But other than that, there was the introduction of the Club League and Club Shop, which was really nice as you could get extra stuff from it, and it was just fun to participate in. And finally, the third big thing this month was the collaboration with Mr. Beast, which is absolutely massive, as this was on a Squid Games video, which now sits at over 600 million views, which is honestly just insane. And this video would also bring a large influx of new players to Brawl Stars. And then to finish off the year, there was another update in December, but honestly there wasn't exactly too much to really talk about other than the introduction of the duels game mode, and the championship this year would also take a dip in viewership. But anyways, moving on to 2022, and this honestly wasn't a great year for the game, and it started off pretty slow as well, with it getting its first update in March. And all this really added was 2 game modes, which are Payload and Wipeout. And other than that, there really wasn't anything major except for, I guess, the tutorial getting the gems swapped out for power cubes. The April update also wasn't exactly too special, with it just introducing Janet and Bonnie, and also introducing sprays along with the bot drop game mode, and none of this was exactly too special in my opinion. So the year so far obviously wasn't off to a great start, and then in June you will get possibly the worst season ever, which was season 13, and honestly this was just really boring. And by this point we are halfway through the year and nothing was really looking that great. The first bit of really good news would finally come in October, and there was a lot of it. First of all, the gears finally received their rework, which just made the game so much better, as the gears were now more accessible, and the systems to get them was just, and the star powers and gadgets would also now be something you could just buy with gold, meaning you didn't have to rely on waiting for something specific to come out of a brawl box or to be available in the shop. So the October update definitely was good and something that the game desperately needed. And then there will be the December update, which was also massive, and it was both good and bad depending on how you felt about it. First of all, the Brawl boxes were removed, and this was controversial because some people liked them while others obviously didn't. And along with the boxes, the Trophy Road specific brawlers would also be removed from the Trophy Road, and instead there is now a new way to unlock brawlers, since the boxes got removed. This new thing was the Star Road, and I honestly do really like it, but it was a bit controversial at the time. And along with that, fame and credits would also be introduced to the game, which were nice. The upgrade system for the brawlers was also changed a little bit so that now the power points were just a general currency and they weren't actually tied to specific brawlers, which was really nice as now you weren't forced to play certain brawlers in order to upgrade them. And there's definitely more stuff, but as for the main stuff, that was it for this update. So now let's move on to 2023. This year also started off relatively slowly with the first update coming in March. However, it was much better than 2022. This would introduce two main things, which were the masteries as well as the titles for each brawler. The titles were just cool things overall, and the masteries were nice as they could be some nice rewards if you decided to work towards them, and they also just added stuff for people to look forward to if they wanted to. In May, Bling was added, and that would replace the star points, and overall Bling has been a very positive addition to the game, and this update would also introduce a catalog, which made getting these skins really easy. And then in June, the star drops were introduced as they were supposed to kind of replace or make up for the removal of Brawl boxes, and these were alright overall. However, then came August, which was anything other than alright. This introduced the Hypercharges, and these were just so controversial for being like pretty pay to win and just locked behind a paywall at the beginning, which a lot of people hated, and there also weren't many of them, which made them really limited to a handful of brawlers, which also added onto the pay to win thing. And this was the biggest controversy the game had ever had, and people were even saying this would destroy the game. However, over time, as more Hypercharges got added, this became less and less of a problem. In October, there was only one big change, and that was the addition of the Mega Pig, which would replace the club leagues. And then in December, we had another pretty big update. This one would introduce the 5v5 game mode, which was a pretty massive deal, and the chromatic rarity was also just completely removed, and all the chromatic brawlers would be given normal rarities. And the Brawl Pass Plus was also added along with win streaks, which was pretty nice. And then that finally brings us to 2024, which is the current year. The first update will be in February, and this introduced the ranked mode, which would be really interesting, and I have also made a separate video on everything about that in case you want to check it out. But the other major thing that happened in February will be the 100 star drop event, which was pretty massive and really cool, and it would bring the community together. In April, we had the whole Godzilla collaboration, and this would really take up April and May, and this was a pretty big deal as it was a massive collaboration and the biggest one they've ever done. And finally, we are now up to the present, in which we just finished the Thumbs Up event, and now 2 new brawlers have been announced, and we have the whole Brawl Boxes event going on. So overall, that has been the complete history of Brawl Stars, with me being as thorough as possible without also going into every little detail. And I'm sure I definitely missed some things, but hopefully this video has given you an idea of how Brawl Stars has really evolved over time. And if you enjoyed, I would appreciate if you could drop a sub and a like, as that would really help me out. But with that, I'll see you all in the next one.